Good morning, friends. Good morning. Well, for you, it's morning. For you, it is Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Or maybe not. Maybe it's some other time because you're joining some other time. For me, it's actually 2:23 on Monday afternoon. That's because while you're watching this, I'll be sitting in a Zoom meeting. Got that for at least half a day today. But I'm Brian. I'm PB. And you are here for another episode of PB Reads the Bible. And today is, we're looking at Daniel. Today is episode 7 on our journey through Daniel. So we will be looking at Daniel chapter 6. Now you can probably tell, or you probably can guess from the image on the behind me here, what chapter 6 involves. Yes, that is correct. Commonly referred to as Daniel in the lion's den. There's Daniel and there's the lions. I'm still having trouble changing pictures, but I was able to get this one working for us. You didn't just have to look at my me sitting in outer space, so to speak. So anyway, we're going to jump into it. We're going to jump into it because since it is a pre-recorded session, I only have 30 minutes to talk to you. I did pretty good the last couple days with doing that. I brought us in just under, a couple minutes under. So we're going to jump right in, chapter 6. And I'll do what I've been doing through these so far this session, this week, this book. I'll read the whole chapter so that you get the flow of the story. Then we'll go back and kind of break it up a little bit and point out a few things and talk about some details and talk about the meaning, both the I guess you would say the real meaning, as well as some meanings that have been put into it that have been seized upon that may not be exactly right, but we'll address them anyway as we go along, or at least we'll try to in 30 minutes. No matter how long I spent on any of these chapters, don't think you're going to get everything that you could possibly get out of a chapter of the Bible. There's always more to learn, always more to talk about. And I'm learning as much as you are, I'm sure, if not more. So let's read it. Chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel. To these the satraps gave account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom. But they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption, because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." All the presidents of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and interdict. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open toward Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day, and to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, "O king, Did you not sign an interdict that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions? The king answered, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they responded to the king, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict you have signed, but he is saying his prayers 3 times a day. When the king heard the charge, he was very much distressed. He was determined to save Daniel, and until the sun went down, he made every effort to rescue him. Then the conspirators came to the king and said to him, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no interdict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of the lions. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you. A stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, so that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then, at break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. When he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Daniel then said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you. O king, I have done no wrong. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king gave a command, and those who had accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples and nations of every language throughout the whole world, may you have abundant prosperity. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. End of chapter. Beautiful story, wonderful story, very powerful story. Excuse me, that you can latch on to very well, and as the reader, especially if you're only hearing it for the first time, you're virtually on the edge of your seat as he's getting ready to sign the document. You want to yell out, no, they're trying to trap you, they're trying to trick you, it's because of your friend Daniel. So it's a great story. Now remember, it is a story. It's a folklore tale. We discussed yesterday that Darius the Mede never existed. If anything, it would have been Cyrus the Persian. He's the one that came along after then invaded Babylon. There was a Darius the Persian, but he doesn't come until after Cyrus. He's much farther along. Also, keep in mind that if this was a literal tale, if we were to read this very literally, based on how long it's been, etc., Daniel would be close to 80 at this point. So not very likely. Not that it's not possible, but not likely. So what then can we learn from it? So we'll go through some details and learn some things. First, it's mentioned that there are satraps and presidents, which tells us too that it's not Medes, because he's described as Darius the Mede, but it's actually in the Persian Empire, the Persian Empire. This was a system that was set up, sort of a system of bureaucracy, I guess you would say. Satraps are like a provincial governor. So the emperor took or king, whatever you want to call him, took the entire empire and broke it down into provinces and appointed a satrap, the provincial governor, in charge of that area. Responsible to the king and reports to the king. Actually, like it says here, reports to a president. So the whole thing is broken up into 120 provinces, and a bunch of the provinces, let's say 40, are put together into a different region that has a president. And so this president is responsible for this section, this one's responsible for this section is responsible for this. So one of those presidents is Daniel, and he's very well liked by the king. The king wants to make him a president above presidents, in charge of the whole kingdom rather than just 1/3 of it. So there are a couple different things that are happening. First of all, we've got egos. We've got jealousy taking place. The other presidents and the satraps, but let's say mostly the other presidents, the other two presidents, seem to be very jealous of Daniel and the fact that he's going to be boosted up higher. Now, the satraps, maybe it's a little bit of jealousy, but since since they're all going to be reporting to Daniel, they don't like that. But more likely, it has to do with something else. It's kind of going to upset the system, and maybe the other presidents allow a little bad stuff to be taking place, and the governors are afraid that they're going to be losing out on some of their authority, some of their autonomy, some of their money. So the author doesn't specifically tell us exactly what reason, but we can assume it's one of those two, maybe a combination of those two, maybe something else thrown in as well. So this is a court tale of conflict. This is definitely a court tale of conflict between these all these satraps and the two presidents and Daniel. A whole bunch of them and Daniel. That's the conflict that's taking place here. It's pretty simple. And Daniel is it's the hero tale. He is definitely the hero of the story. So they first try to find ways to trap him, but they can't. Daniel's too honest, too honorable. What's interesting is he is referred to by the king that what was it? That he had an excellent spirit was in him. The author doesn't say exactly what is meant by that. Now, we might think that is similar, at least to some extent, to what Nebuchadnezzar had said about him a couple times, that he had a spirit of the gods was in him or was upon him. So maybe that's what they're talking about here, but it also, could be some sort of different spirit, just because it doesn't specifically say gods or even holy or anything like that. But there's something about him that the king wants to elevate him. But because of this spirit, because of his honorableness, they know that they can't trap him. So they're going to have to trick him or trick the king. And it's going to have to be something about one of the laws of God, of Daniel's God, of Yahweh. So they presumably know what the laws are, and that Daniel is not going to violate one of the immutable laws of God, in particular, worship. So that's their catch. That's why they're doing this, because this law from God, Daniel believes to be immutable and will not break it, will not violate it. And they're going to use an immutable law of the world, of this land of the Medes. He says Medes and Persians, an immutable law, and see which of these two immutable laws are going to win. They say they've got this immutable law of the Medes and Persians and the immutable law of God are going to be the two forces of the conflict, and which one's going to win? Spoiler alert, the immutable law of God, or the God who is behind that immutable law. Now, they say, they go through that whole scene with the king. Oh, king, live forever, etc., etc., etc. We suggest you make this interdict, etc., etc. That will be immutable by the laws and cannot be revoked by the laws of the Medes and the Persians. That actually doesn't exist as far as history can tell. It seems to be a myth, a mythological law or rule. We do see it in the book of Esther, but again, as a myth that if the emperor of the Medes or the Persians writes a law and signs it, it cannot be changed, no matter what, not even by the king himself. First of all, that doesn't really make sense, does it? I mean, if you're the most powerful person, we're talking about the king, emperor, whatever way you want to say it, doesn't have a parliament or a congress or anything like that. If they're the ones that are making the law, if that's the person, if I'm the one that's making the law, I should be able to make a law that changes it, revokes it. That makes sense. The idea of one that you cannot revoke does not make sense. And historical documents indicate, there is no mention of this kind of a thing. So it's a myth. It's a myth. But the king goes along with it. Why? The author's just telling a story, right? Again, because that doesn't seem to make sense. It should be pretty obvious to him that somebody's lying, because all the presidents. Well, how come there's only two of you here? Daniel's not even there, present, when they're making this claim and putting this before him. Well, if it was all the presidents, and there's really only three presidents, why would only two of them show up, right? So it's pretty obvious that they're lying, but he goes along with it. Now, the rest of the story, we have no indication that Darius is, an ego-hungry, power-mad kind of a guy. It doesn't say that really anywhere. It doesn't even say that as part of the why they come up with this idea to send it, to give this law and present this before the king. It doesn't. So why does he go along with it? Because it's a story, right? Because it's a story. But he goes along with it. He signs the decree. Daniel continues to do what he regularly does. Now, it's interesting to know, that's what Daniel does. Daniel just does what he regularly does. He just does what he regularly does. He doesn't, this is like, it's peaceful. It's oh, darn it. He's not going out of his way. He's not being super forceful with it. It's civil disobedience. He's doing civil disobedience. He's just gonna pray. He's just gonna worship. Now, it does say he's got his windows open facing towards Jerusalem. So maybe he did that intentionally so that they could see. But again, it seems like that was part of his regular process, opening the windows so that he could face towards Jerusalem. Now, by this time, of course, Jerusalem virtually doesn't exist. Was beaten so badly and all that stuff during the time of Jeremiah and Nebuchadnezzar, the way Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city and burned it down. So it's the idea of Jerusalem is what he is truly facing. Mr. Toner, Dr. Toner suggests that it's what Jerusalem represents for someone who is living in exile at the time of Daniel, but also at the time that the stories are being written and the time that the stories are being put together, edited and put together. Jerusalem represents hope and represents a future. So he is facing towards future, and he's facing towards hope. And that is what the other presidents and the satraps don't want. They don't like the idea that Daniel has hope, or that these exiles, these foreigners, have hope, and they want to try to destroy that hope by not letting him worship anybody other than Darius. Okay, that's interesting. I find that very interesting. So Jerusalem, it's not so much the city, but as the idea of Jerusalem and hope of Jerusalem. So the king, oh, he's tormented. He's tormented. Again, if he's the king, he's the most powerful person. Why can't he just change his mind? He should be able to, but this mythological rule says he can't. He can't go back on it. So he does have to have Daniel thrown into the lion's den. The translation I read says, "May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you." And a lot of them say that. The NIV says that basically the same thing. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. So almost the exact same thing. Is that word "deliver" thrown in there again, right? It was used earlier in chapter 3. We talked about that. The idea of deliverance is an important word. The Aramaic, though, is difficult to translate, and so you might have a translation that says something different. This one sounds like a challenge, sort of like a hope. It can also be read as more like your God will deliver you, more of an affirmative statement that Darius is sure that God will deliver you from the lion's den, and you will be safe. We've got 8 minutes to go here. So it can be read either of those two ways. It sounds like Darius is at least fairly sure, fairly confident in the God of Daniel, in Yahweh. So he can't sleep. He fasts. He does a lot of good stuff there, doesn't he? And is surprised to see the next morning that Daniel is alive and well. We have this horrible scene, though, of all of these enemies of Daniel and their wives and their children being thrown into the lion's den. So there's different. There's actually the Septuagint version of translation of the Bible. That because if this is true, then it's 122 men, the satraps and presidents, plus all their wives and all their children getting dumped into the pit. But there's a Septuagint translation that limits it to only the other two presidents, perhaps their wives and children as well, but not the 120 satraps. Kind of only the two ringleaders, so to speak, and their families getting thrown in. So which is the older of the stories? And it depends on how you look at it, because the one would say that the older story would be the smaller number of people, because over time, as you tell the story, you naturally make things bigger and grander, et cetera, et cetera. However, the other way to look at it is that the much smaller one is more recent, is the more recent, the later story, because after it's gone through this expansion, it's contracted down. It's sort of corrected down to a smaller number. Doesn't matter. I don't think it matters anyway, which one is which, because it's not a truthful story. It's not a factual story. Okay. So it ends with Darius giving this wonderful little prayer, the poem, which is quite interesting, because he speaks to God as a living God, enduring forever, never be destroyed, and kingdom have no end. So it's a nice segue. The author or the editor, if the editor added this, it's a nice segue into the second half of the book, which are much later documents telling this tale of the other part of the apocalypse and the eschatological end of times thing with God being victorious over all things and kingdom having no end. So it's an interesting connection there. Now, some people see in this dramatic connections between Daniel's story and the story of Jesus, in particular in the book of Matthew. There are a number of similarities between the stories. Excuse me. The people who try to trap Daniel, people try to trap Jesus. Oh, excuse me. They use the laws and appeal to a political entity, and Jesus's, they do the same thing using this Jesus's claim to be king of the Jews, to ultimately trap him. We have Daniel taken before the king, the ruler, and yes, that takes place with Jesus, right? The ruler doesn't want to virtually execute the prisoner. Pilate didn't want to do it, especially in Matthew, and his wife says, "Don't have nothing to do with this man." Right? Tries to find ways. Both of them try to find ways out of it. Ultimately, put into a cave, into a den, a stone put over and sealed. Jesus put into a tomb, a cave, stone put over and sealed. Comes out of the cave alive, the tomb, whatever. Stone is removed. He comes out. Stone is removed. He's alive. Now, obviously, the differences are Daniel never dies, whereas Jesus did literally die and was raised from the dead. But we can see those similarities in the stories and why some people have grasped onto that so much. We can also say that, although Daniel isn't a prototype for Jesus, we can see it in part only, as that allegory of death and resurrection, especially as we're getting ready to go into the eschatological part of the book of Daniel. So those are interesting things. Well, friends, 2 minutes left. Woohoo! Got the 2-minute warning. So thank you very much for joining me today or whenever it is. And go ahead and check in, even though I'm not here live. I'll be looking to see if you've been watching. As you go about your day, folks, keep your eyes and ears open for what God is doing in your life and in the life of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, God," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.